This movie is based on the true story of America's most cunning and intelligent thief. The movie's name is Catch Me If You Can. This movie's story begins from a 1969 incident where an American FBI agent named Carl is seen standing in front of a prison in France. And Carl has come here to meet an American prisoner named Frank Abagnale Jr. after entering the prison. While Carl was talking with Frank, Frank suddenly became very ill. Therefore, he was brought out from inside his cell for medical treatment. After bringing Frank outside, when Carl and all the other police of that prison became a little distracted, Frank tried to escape from there, but because his body was weak, he couldn't run far. And shortly after he went some distance, Carl came and caught him again. And from here, the entire incident goes into a flashback of 4 years earlier, where Frank is 15 years old and is at a club party with his entire family, where his father is being honored with an award. Frank's family had only 3 members: his father, mother, and him, and this small family of 3 was doing quite well. Each of them was very cheerful. But then, it's learned that Frank's father lost a lot of money in business, and therefore his father must take a loan from the bank. But the bank doesn't want to give him any kind of loan. Forced by this, they have to sell their own house. And now, all of them start living together in a small house. Several days after this incident, Frank's birthday arrives. And now, he steps into 16 years of age. Therefore, his father opens a bank account in his name and deposits $25 there. And then, on Frank's birthday, his father gives him that checkbook and says, "This is yours now. You can do whatever you want with it." And here, for the first time in his life, Frank holds the checkbook and looks at it, and he really likes that checkbook. Meanwhile, it's seen that because of changing their house, Frank also had to change his school. And here, he leaves his prestigious private school and enrolls in a government school. But out of habit, he wears his previous school's uniform to this government school. And when Frank enters the classroom of the new school wearing his uniform, all the other students mistake him for a teacher, and Frank takes advantage of this opportunity. With great confidence, he starts teaching the other students his own age. But after several days, the school principal learns about this incident involving Frank, and he calls Frank's parents and complains about this matter. But even after knowing this, Frank's father doesn't pay much attention to this issue, because Frank and his father interacted like friends with each other, and they loved each other very much. Now, several days after this incident, when Frank returns home from school, he is informed that his father and mother are getting divorced, and he is asked which parent he wants to live with. But because of this incident, Frank becomes extremely confused, and he runs away from there. After running away from there, Frank starts staying at a hotel for several days. And since he had no money, he was using his own checkbook to pay the hotel bill. Now, after 2 weeks, the hotel owner learns that because there wasn't enough money in his account, the checks he gave were bouncing. And for that reason, he is thrown out of the hotel. Now, Frank really likes the process of paying bills with checks and withdrawing money from banks. Since no bank was computerized at that time, it took more than 2 weeks to know account details from one bank to another. And Frank wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. He tried to change the code numbers on the checks he had and use them to withdraw money from the bank. But no bank agrees to give money to an unknown person. Therefore, Frank's idea isn't very successful. Now one day, Frank sees a pilot on the street, and he notices that everyone respects that pilot very much. Everyone tries to get his autograph. Actually, at that time, a pilot's respect was like that of a celebrity. Seeing this, Frank decides to dress up as a fake pilot to cash his checks. For that, he goes to a big airline company named Pan Am. After going there, he introduces himself as a student magazine editor and fixes an appointment with a senior pilot there. Now, while taking the pilot's interview, Frank gathers all kinds of detailed information about being a pilot from him. Then, after arranging a pilot's uniform, Frank goes straight to the bank to cash his fake checks. Since Frank was disguised as a fake pilot inside that bank, the bank manager himself comes and gives him the money. After that, Frank creates several fake payroll checks in Pan Am's name, and with their help, he starts withdrawing large amounts of money. Frank would always open accounts at various different banks and alter the numbers at the bottom of those banks' checks so that the check would go to the wrong branch of the bank, and Frank would gain a lot of extra time because of that. And within that time, Frank would take the money and escape somewhere far from there. Whenever Frank went to the bank to withdraw money, he would wear his pilot's uniform. Now one day, when Frank goes to the bank to withdraw money, he learns that all Pan Am pilots can collect their money from the airport, so they don't need to come to the bank. Frank talked to everyone with so much confidence that no one could tell by looking at him that he wasn't a pilot, but just a 16-year-old kid. Now when Frank arrives at the airport to cash his check, a receptionist there asks him, "Are you the pilot who's scheduled to go to Miami?" And Frank immediately replies, "Yes, that's me." And then, Frank sits in the back of a plane's pilot cabin and goes to Miami for free from there. And after riding a plane for free this way once, Frank really enjoys this. And right after that, he travels to various countries around the world using the same process. and after going to various countries around the world, he starts withdrawing money there too using fake Pan Am payroll checks. Now Frank has withdrawn so much money with those fake checks that this case has now gone to the FBI. And in charge of this case is Carl, who was shown at the beginning of the movie. Now, by following the fake checks, Carl reaches the hotel where Frank is staying, and slowly entering Frank's room, Carl shouts, "Come out! I'm FBI!" Frank was in the bathroom at this time. He comes out very confidently and tells Carl, "You're too late. I'm from the Special Forces, and I just caught that check fraud suspect." After hearing this, Carl asks to see his ID, and Frank gives him his entire wallet. Frank was so confident that Carl doesn't even open his wallet. Now Frank, in turn, asks to see Carl's ID, and Carl shows it to him. Now Frank tells him, "I'm going to take this typewriter and fake checks downstairs to put in the car, and until then, you stand inside this room. I don't want any hotel waiter coming and touching these items." After Frank leaves the room, Carl starts opening his ID. And when Carl opens his wallet, he is completely shocked. Forget any ID inside the wallet. There were just a few pieces of paper and stickers, which made him realize he'd been fooled, and by then, Frank had already escaped from there. Now, through investigation, Carl learns that Frank is just a boy and isn't even 18 years old yet. Therefore, Carl starts searching with his whole team to find out how many children have run away from home from New York City in the last few months. And searching this way, Carl reaches Frank's mother. Frank's mother has remarried and started a separate family. While talking with Frank's mother, Carl sees a picture of Frank there. And seeing that picture, Carl completely recognizes Frank. Now, several days after this incident, Frank goes to a hospital for some need. There he meets a girl named Brenda, and he really likes that girl. Now Frank decides to change his profession from pilot to doctor. For that, he produces a fake Harvard College certificate and joins this nursing home as a senior surgeon. After Frank joins there, a patient from an emergency accident is admitted there. Then Frank goes to see that patient with 2 junior doctors. But after seeing that patient, Frank couldn't understand what should be done. Therefore, he asks his junior doctors, "What do you think should be done now?" Hearing this, it seemed like Frank was perhaps testing them in some way. Then those 2 doctors confidently answer Frank's question, and hearing that, Frank says, "I don't need to be here. Both of you can handle this matter," and leaves from there. Meanwhile, it seemed that a deep relationship has developed between Frank and Brenda, and the 2 of them want to get married. Therefore, Frank decides he will talk to Brenda's father about this marriage. While talking with Brenda's father, he learns that her father is a very famous, big lawyer. While talking with her father, Frank tells several lies, but her father understands them. Although later, Frank tells him all the true things, and seeing Frank's honesty and confidence, her father agrees to this marriage. Meanwhile, it's seen that while searching for Frank, Carl has reached his father, but his father doesn't want to give any information about his son to Carl in any way. Then Carl sees a letter written by Frank there, and writing down the address from the back of that letter, Carl goes there to find Frank. But after going to that address, it's seen that Frank isn't there. Only his fake medical certificates are lying there. Now, on Christmas Day, Frank calls Carl and tells him, "I want to surrender now." But Carl doesn't agree to this. He says, "I'll catch you in a few days." Now, since Frank had told Carl that he was getting married, Carl deploys his entire team to see how many wedding ads have been published in the paper in the last 2 months. Now, getting the address from there, Carl arrives at Frank's wedding on the day, and seeing Carl from a distance, Frank runs away from there. And before running away from there, he tells Brenda to meet him at Miami Airport exactly 2 days later. Now, 2 days later, when Frank arrives at the airport to bring Brenda, he sees from a distance that FBI agents are scattered all over the airport. Therefore, he runs away from there. Carl tightens all the security at the airport there so that Frank cannot escape in any way. Meanwhile, Frank comes up with another plan. He puts on his pilot uniform and goes to a girls' college. And going there, he announces that he has come from Pan Am Airlines. And from this college, he will choose a total of 8 girls who will be made air hostesses by Pan Am in the future. Now, under the pretext of training those girls, he takes them from the college to the airport. And after entering the airport, Frank hides among those 8 girls. Now, when they were entering inside the airport, the police and FBI agents there were looking at those beautiful girls. Because of which, Frank, hiding among the girls, easily enters the airport. And escaping from there, Frank comes to France. All this time, he used to make fake checks by hand, but now he uses a machine to make checks. And therefore, now it's impossible to tell by looking at the checks he makes which one is real and which one is fake. Now news comes to the FBI that Frank has started making fake checks again. Now Carl gets those fake checks made by Frank examined by experts. From there, Carl learns that Frank's checks were made by machine, which is why they are so perfect. And these check-making machines are only in European countries, France, Germany, and England. And hearing this, Carl remembers that Frank's mother used to live in a small village in France. Now, to catch Frank, Carl goes to that village in France and finds Frank there. When Carl arrests him and comes outside, the French police take him into their custody. Now, from here, the entire incident that had been in flashback until now comes back to the present. Now it's seen that Carl is bringing Frank out of that prison and taking him to America by plane. And while coming on the plane, Carl tells him that Frank's father is no longer alive. He died in an accident. After knowing this, Frank's condition becomes very bad, and he goes into the plane's bathroom and starts crying. Now it's seen that a long time has passed, but Frank still hasn't come out of the bathroom, and meanwhile it's time for the plane to land. After much calling from outside, no response is heard from Frank inside. Therefore, Carl breaks the bathroom door and goes inside. After entering, it's seen that Frank isn't there. He unscrewed the bathroom basin and escaped from there, and as the plane slows down a bit after landing, he comes out of that plane and escapes from that airport. And escaping from there, he comes straight to meet his mother. But after coming there, he sees that his mother has remarried and she has a child too. When Frank was watching these things from outside that house, Carl arrives there to arrest him. Now, after seeing Carl from behind, he doesn't try to run anymore. He is now mentally very alone. His father has died, and his mother has now started a new family. After taking Frank to court, he is sent to jail for 12 years for all his crimes. While Frank is in jail, Carl comes to visit him one day, and during the conversation, he tells Frank that he is now going to catch a new check fraud suspect. And after hearing this, Frank asks to see that check. And right there, sitting in that place, he gives Carl all the information about that check. After seeing this, Carl is extremely impressed with Frank. And from then on, Carl starts occasionally taking information about fake checks from Frank. Seeing Frank's so much knowledge about checks, Carl appeals to the government to pardon his remaining punishment and have him join the FBI's check fraud department. And from then on, Frank starts working in the FBI's check fraud department. But he wasn't very focused here. He wasn't liking this job very much. Therefore, suddenly one day, he puts on a pilot's uniform and goes to the airport. And following him, Carl also arrives there. Carl tells him, "I didn't come to arrest you today. I know that exactly 2 days from now you will return to the office." And 2 days later, exactly that happens. Frank returns to that office on his own. And throughout this entire movie, Carl had asked Frank one question many times, which Frank never answered. And now, at the end of the movie, Carl asks Frank that question again. And that is, how did you pass Louisiana's entrance exam? It's a law entrance exam that is very difficult. Carl asks him, did you cheat? Or did someone else take the exam in your place? Then Frank tells him that he passed that exam after studying for only 2 weeks. And after hearing Frank's words, it's understood that Frank, besides being smart, was extremely intelligent. And here, this movie's story ends. And in the end, it's shown that it's been 26 years since Frank got married, and he also has 3 sons. And Carl and Frank have solved many check fraud cases together in America and saved the government a lot of money. If you liked the video, you can subscribe to the channel.